As usual, there was just a week between the German and Austrian races, and as usual, the news cycle was quiet too. The birth of a baby in Australia named Christopher Hemsworth wouldn't turn out to be newsworthy for some time. So, with Paul Young's Wherever I Lay My Hat That's My Home giving way to Give It Up by Casey and the Sunshine Band at the UK number 1, the teams made their way south to the Austrian state of Styria for the annual visit to the scenic Österreichring. Frank Williams announced that, as widely suspected, his team would be linking up with Honda for a turbo engine deal, and was hoping to debut the new combination at Brands Hatch for the European Grand Prix in just over a month's time. It was also expected to be the last race for McLaren with Ford Power, with their tag Porsche engines finally available at Zandvoort. Even Ken Tyrrell was talking about using turbos next year. His new O12 chassis made its first appearance here, and the unusual boomerang rear wing was explained as allowing them to enlarge the engine cover to accept a turbo for next year, as well as seeing if there was any mileage in the idea of chevron or triangular designs giving more wing area for the same width. In the end, the boomerang Tyrrell sprang a leak, and Alboreto didn't seem to think the new wing was making much difference anyway, so they swapped him to a more traditionally winged O12, which had brake issues during qualifying, so it was back to the O11 for the race at least. Lotus were having very mixed fortunes, with De Angelis having all sorts of problems and reverting to the old 93T car, while Mansell's 94T was working perfectly, and he was looking very good on the timing sheets on Friday morning's practice. By contrast, the Spirits team were having a nightmare with their gearbox and had to completely rebuild it instead of actually setting any laps on Friday afternoon. Friday qualifying took place on a warm and muggy day which ended in a rainstorm, but Saturday was fine again, and once again the Ferraris were streets ahead of the rest, with Tambay and Arnoux having a spirited scrap over pole, which ended up with the blue-helmeted Frenchman ahead of the white-helmeted one this time out. Mansell made good on his promising practice times in third place alongside Piquet, with Prost down in fifth beside Patrese. Giacomelli outqualified Warwick for once in an excellent 7th place, with Chiva and Baldi separating the two Tolmans. De Angelis could only manage 12th, local hero Lauda 14th, and top non-turbo for a change, alongside Rosberg in 15th, with Johansson salvaging 16th, a dispirited Lafitte down in 24th, and both Azellas qualifying for a change, leaving Buzzell, Cecotto and the unfortunate Kenny Aitchison on the sidelines for race day. As ever, with the race taking place mid-August, there was a large crowd and a holiday atmosphere, with the locals rooting for Lauda, Italians rooting for Ferrari, locals rooting for Ferrari after Lauda's stint there, and many more besides. There was an air show over lunch to keep them all entertained, including a turn by an RAF Harrier based in West Germany, while the crew worked on preparing the cars. The Spirits team's woes continued as Johansson felt the engine seize up on his way around to the grid and came back in to swap to the spare car, the old 201, but other than that things went well, and following the parade lap all was ready for the race. Prost angling his Renault on the grid to point to the outside of the track in the hopes of getting around the cars ahead quickly. In the event he was balked by a slow starting Mansell, as Piquet slithered round the Lotus to take third. Mansell recovered to hang on to fourth, while Tambay held on to the lead as the field made its way round lap 1. A midfield tangle saw Lafitte bounce off Jarrier into Sura, knocking the Arrow's front wheel off and spinning the Swiss driver out, and causing Fabi to brake and Watson to wipe off half his front wing on the Azella, while Sullivan also sustained damage in the incident and retired. A separate incident saw De Angelis spin out and Giacomelli end up in the railings avoiding him, so there were already 4 cars retired and 2 heading for the pits on lap 1, as the 2 Ferraris, with Piquet hot on their heels, began to pull away from Mansell and co. behind, with Prost getting past the Lotus partway round the lap and setting off in pursuit. As the second lap proceeded, Mansell was still dropping back, now losing 5th place to Patrese. The Tolman team could pack up and go home fairly early as Warwick's turbo gave out on lap 3, and the top 7, Tambay, Arnoux, Piquet, Prost, Patrese, Mansell and Chiva, were running within a couple of seconds of each other and pulling away from the 2 Alphas behind, who were in turn somewhere ahead of Winkelhock, Lauda and the rest. Further back, Johansson tangled with Alboreto and ended up on the grass, getting out of his car, only to decide the damage looked fairly minor, and he realised he was stopped on a downslope, so he got back in, rolled the car forward and bump-started it, heading back to the pits for a new nose cone. Crucially, he hadn't had any help from the marshals, so he wouldn't be disqualified. By about a quarter distance, Arnoux was still with Tambay, and had the occasional sniff at the lead, but Tambay responded by speeding up, while Prost bullied his way past Piquet, banging wheels with the Brabham as they lapped Guerrero. Piquet wasted no time getting the place back, while Arnoux had another look at Tambay. It was all great stuff, and once they got among the backmarkers there were plenty of other opportunities. Jean-Pierre Jarier was particularly reluctant to be lapped, and balked Tambay, allowing Arnoux past into the lead and Piquet into second, leaving Tambay to shake his fist impotently as he finally passed the Ligier himself. He should certainly have a short suspension for that, opined James Hunt, and, for being himself, a longer suspension. Jarier had been making himself unpopular in the paddock most of the season for his blocking of faster cars lapping him, but this was the first time he'd materially affected the lead of the race. At that point, on lap 22 of 53, Prost was the first in for new boots and a drink of petrol, returning to the track 7th. Boutsen was in next unexpectedly with one of his 8 cylinders not firing. The team changed his spark plugs and sent him back out onto the track to see what happened. Cheever stopped on lap 26 with a cracking 10.7 seconds stop, while his teammate Prost was charging up through the field, matching times with Arnoux, who was next in, accompanied by Patrese. That left Piquet leading Tambay until the Ferrari got past the Brabham to retake the lead. Riccardo Patrese was out with a blown BMW, again, and then Tambay peeled into the pits with a dead ignition and was out. Piquet got out just in front of Arnoux, and despite cold tyres he managed to stay ahead of the charging Ferrari until he was back on the pace. So after the pit stops had shaken out, Piquet led Arnoux, Prost, Cheever and Mansell, and it was still very close up front as the top 3 were only covered by a couple of seconds as they lapped 6th placed Lauda. Arnoux motored up to the back of Piquet's car and started attacking, while Prost hung back a bit. Had Arnoux turned up the boost a bit? No, Piquet was having a slight misfire in his engine, and both Arnoux and Prost got through on lap 37, despite Nelson's best efforts. Prost wasn't done yet, though, and stuck with his old rival Arnoux as the race entered its final stages. The Renault driver was in an attacking mood and harried the Ferrari until he got past on lap 48 and immediately began to pull away. Meanwhile, Cheever in 4th was taking lumps out of Piquet's lead, and it would be very close as to who took the final podium spot in the end. Arnoux was now suffering gearbox problems and had dropped back in the final laps as Prost took his 4th win of the year, with Arnoux's gearbox giving out on the slowing down lap. Piquet just kept Cheever behind him, so Eddie had to settle for 4th, with Mansell and Lauda taking the last points places. Further down, the Spirit and Azella teams could be happy to finish, the first time Spirit had done so, but not as happy as Prost, who had not only stretched his championship lead further, with just 4 races left, but had done so by beating his bitter rival fair and square on the track.